The scene opens with a bright and peaceful suburban neighborhood. Picture a well-maintained street lined with houses, neat lawns, and kids playing in the yards. It's a Sunday afternoon, the sun is shining, and everything seems calm and friendly. The camera pans over the neighborhood as neighbors wave at each other, smiling and chatting. This is a tight-knit, family-oriented community where everyone knows everyone else. The birds are chirping, and there's a sense of comfort in the air. Cut to a moving truck parked outside a cozy two-story home. The camera zooms in on a smiling black family as they unload boxes and furniture from the truck. The father, James, is in his mid-30s, dressed in a casual shirt and jeans. He's carrying a box with a big smile on his face, clearly excited about their new beginning. He's a teacher, passionate about education, and dedicated to making a positive impact in his students' lives. His wife, Sarah, also in her 30s, is carrying a smaller box with a friendly and welcoming expression. She's a nurse known for her kindness and work ethic, always putting others before herself. Their two kids, Aiden, a teenager, and Jasmine, a younger child, help out by carrying smaller items. Aiden looks around, feeling a bit nervous, but trying to stay positive, while Jasmine is excited, looking at the new house with wide eyes. The family is excited to start a new chapter in this peaceful neighborhood. They exchange smiles and laughter as they work together, clearly a close-knit, loving family who is hardworking, friendly, and respectful. The camera focuses on their faces. There's a sense of hope and determination in their expressions. They have big dreams for their new home, and they're eager to be a part of this community. As the family continues to unpack, a few neighbors watch them from their windows. Their faces are neutral at first, but there's a noticeable shift in their body language. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman, squints her eyes, whispering to her husband, Mr. Thompson, from behind their curtains. "I haven't seen them around here before," she murmurs, eyeing the family carefully. Another neighbor, Mr. Parker, an older man with a stern face, looks out from his window and mutters to himself, "Wonder how long they'll stay." He shakes his head, then turns away, as if uncomfortable. Across the street, Lucy, a middle-aged woman, stands at her front door, her arms crossed as she watches the family, her expression unreadable. She glances at her husband, but he doesn't respond. The subtle glances and whispers suggest the family doesn't fit the norm in their eyes, though they haven't done anything wrong. The camera lingers on these neighbors for a moment, highlighting their subtle discomfort. They continue to watch the family, unsure of how to react. There's no open hostility yet, but the unspoken tension is clear. The tone is set. Despite the seemingly welcoming neighborhood, things may not be as warm as they appear. The scene shifts to a quiet morning a few days after the family has moved in. We focus on Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman from earlier, and Mr. Parker, the older man, both of whom seem particularly bothered by the new family. Mrs. Thompson, in her mid-60s, is sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, looking out over the neighborhood. She fidgets with her hands, clearly uneasy, her sharp eyes constantly darting to the new family's house. Mr. Parker, across the street, is tending to his garden. He pauses for a moment to glance over at the black family's house, his expression hardened. The two of them exchange a glance when they notice the family's kids, Aiden and Jasmine, playing together outside. The children are laughing, tossing a ball back and forth, nothing out of the ordinary. But Mrs. Thompson shakes her head, muttering to herself, "Kids like that don't belong out here, always causing trouble." She eyes them with suspicion, as if expecting them to break something or disrupt the peaceful neighborhood. The camera cuts to Mr. Parker, who watches the kids play. He squints his eyes, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Why are they always outside? They don't seem like the kind of people who'd keep to themselves." The next scene shows a delivery truck pulling into the family's driveway. It's a routine delivery, but as the truck parks, Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Parker both notice. "Another delivery?" Mrs. Thompson whispers, looking over at Mr. Parker. "Who needs this much stuff?" They both watch as the driver hands the delivery to James, the father. Mrs. Thompson mutters, "They're always getting deliveries. Maybe they're up to something." Mr. Parker nods slowly, not saying anything but clearly agreeing. Later that day, Mrs. Thompson is sitting at her window, looking out as the family's car is parked outside, nothing unusual. But her mind is already running wild with assumptions. What's with the car? It's been there all day. Could they be hiding something? She thinks to herself, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. Across the street, Mr. Parker is talking to a neighbor, his voice lowered so only Mrs. Thompson can hear. "I've seen that car parked out front a few times now. I don't trust it. They're always around, and something just doesn't feel right." Mrs. Thompson nods in agreement, a worried expression on her face. Later, they sit in their living rooms, separately but united in their thoughts, watching the family through their windows. The camera zooms in on their faces. There's a deepening sense of mistrust. They begin to gossip more frequently, feeding off each other's discomfort. They talk about the family's presence in the neighborhood, convinced that something is wrong, even though nothing is out of the ordinary. The neighbors begin to speak louder and more often about their suspicions, even when no one asks. "Something's going on over there, I'm telling you," Mr. Parker says to another neighbor, who is still trying to make small talk. The gossip begins to spread. The growing suspicion becomes more intense, despite the lack of evidence. The scene opens on a quiet evening in the neighborhood. The camera focuses on the Black family. James and Sarah are sitting on their porch, enjoying a peaceful evening with their kids. James is reading a book while Sarah sips on her coffee. Aiden and Jasmine are playing in the yard, laughing and enjoying themselves. Everything seems perfectly normal, like any other family spending time together. But from the window of Mrs. Thompson's house, the camera zooms in on her face, her eyes narrowing with growing concern. She watches them, her mind racing. They're out there too much. Something doesn't feel right, she thinks, gripping her teacup tightly. Her hand trembles slightly. It's clear that the suspicion she's been harboring has finally reached its peak. Across the street, Mr. Parker's face hardens as he watches the family from his own window. He's been building up his mistrust for days now, and it's all coming to a boiling point. His voice is low as he talks to Mrs. Thompson on the phone. "I can't take it anymore. We need to do something about this," Mrs. Thompson responds with a hesitant tone. "But what if we're wrong?" There's a moment of doubt, but her voice hardens as she continues. "No, I don't think we are. Something's off with them, and I won't ignore it anymore." The camera switches to a tense scene as Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Parker sit in their respective homes, whispering back and forth on the phone. They decide to call the police. Mrs. Thompson dials 911, speaking in a low but urgent voice. "Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity. There's a family moving in next door, and they've been acting strangely. Their kids are always outside making a lot of noise, and their car's been parked there for hours. There are people coming and going at all hours of the day. It doesn't seem right." Mr. Parker is also on his phone, pacing back and forth in his living room. "There's definitely something going on over there. I've seen people I don't recognize hanging around in their yard. It's not normal. I'm worried they might be up to no good." Both of them exaggerate the situation, fabricating details to make it sound more serious than it actually is. The police dispatcher listens calmly as they continue to make baseless claims. The scene cuts to the family still on their porch, enjoying the calm evening. Suddenly, sirens break the tranquility. James, Sarah, Aiden, and Jasmine look up, puzzled as a police car pulls up to their driveway. The officers step out, their faces stern but professional. James stands up quickly, instinctively placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Why are the police here?" Aiden asks, his voice shaky. Jasmine clings to her mother, looking confused. Sarah tries to keep calm, but she's clearly nervous. "I'm sure it's a mistake. Just stay close." She walks over to the officers as they approach. The officer, a white male in his late 30s, looks at Sarah first. "Mom, we've received a report of suspicious activity here." His tone is professional, but there's an underlying sense of seriousness. "We need to ask a few questions." Sarah nods slowly, trying to understand. "Suspicious activity? What do you mean?" "We're just a family enjoying the evening." She looks over at James, who is standing by the yard holding back his frustration. The officer glances at the kids, who are now standing quietly by their parents, clearly uncomfortable. "There were reports of loud noise and unknown people in the yard. We just need to check things out." James steps forward, speaking calmly but firmly. "I don't know what's going on, officer. We're just living here, minding our own business." The family is confused but tries to remain composed. The kids exchange nervous looks, unsure of why they're being questioned in their own yard. Meanwhile, through the windows, the neighbors Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Parker are watching, their expressions satisfied. Mrs. Thompson nods slowly, a look of self-assurance on her face. "I knew it," she mutters under her breath. Mr. Parker, standing at his window, crosses his arms, a smug smile on his face. As the family stands on their front porch, still confused and unsure about why the police are there, the officer steps out of the patrol car. The camera lingers on the vehicle as the siren stops and the doors open. The tension in the air is thick as everyone waits in anticipation. The neighbors, peering from behind their curtains, expect the situation to escalate quickly. They have already assumed the worst, convinced that something is wrong with the family. They're eager to see how the officer handles the situation. The officer walks confidently up the driveway, his uniform crisp and neat. He doesn't rush, his movements calm and collected. The neighbors, watching from their windows, feel a mixture of curiosity and discomfort waiting for a moment of drama that doesn't seem to come. As the officer approaches the family, the camera zooms in on his face. Officer Thomas, a black man in his early 40s, stands tall and composed. His presence is calm but authoritative. He's a man of confidence, but also a man who understands the weight of his role in moments like these. When the officer steps out of the car, the neighbors' faces instantly fall. The camera cuts to Mrs. Thompson's expression, her eyes widen slightly, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. She expected a white officer, someone who would be on their side. But now, as she sees Officer Thomas approach the family, her face turns pale with surprise. Mr. Parker, standing in his living room, slowly lowers the blinds, trying to hide his shock. His hand trembles as he does so, clearly uncomfortable with the reality that is unfolding before him. Mrs. Thompson mutters under her breath, I didn't expect that." The family, unaware of the neighbors' reactions, remains calm. Sarah and James exchange glances but don't show any sign of fear or anxiety. They both smile warmly as Officer Thomas approaches, relieved that the situation might be resolved quickly. "Good evening, officer," Sarah says politely, though her voice is still filled with uncertainty. "Can we help you with something?" Officer Thomas nods respectfully, his voice calm. I'm just here to clear up a misunderstanding. We got a call about some concerns in the neighborhood and I wanted to speak with you for a moment." His demeanor is professional but empathetic. The family thanks him for his calm approach. "We appreciate you coming by," James responds, his voice steady. "We're just trying to settle into our new home." The neighbors continue to watch from their windows, unable to hide their discomfort. Mrs. Thompson shifts uncomfortably in her seat, clearly shaken. I thought he would be like us," she murmurs. Mr. Parker, who has been hiding behind his curtains, turns away from the window entirely, avoiding the scene. His face is flushed with embarrassment as the reality of the situation settles in. The family remains unaware of the tension building among the neighbors. They continue speaking with Officer Thomas, who is polite and considerate, ensuring that everything is okay. The neighbors, however, are left with a sense of unease. They had expected the situation to escalate with a white officer in charge, but now that it's a black officer, they're unsure how to react. As the family stands on their front porch, still confused and unsure about why the police are there, the officer steps out of the patrol car. The camera lingers on the vehicle as the siren stops and the doors open. The tension in the air is thick as everyone waits in anticipation. The neighbors, peering from behind their curtains, expect the situation to escalate quickly. They have already assumed the worst, convinced that something is wrong with the family. They're eager to see how the officer handles the situation. The officer walks confidently up the driveway, his uniform crisp and neat. He doesn't rush, his movements calm and collected. The neighbors, watching from their windows, feel a mixture of curiosity and discomfort waiting for a moment of drama that doesn't seem to come. As the officer approaches the family, the camera zooms in on his face. Officer Thomas, a black man in his early 40s, stands tall and composed. His presence is calm but authoritative. He's a man of confidence, but also a man who understands the weight of his role in moments like these. When the officer steps out of the car, the neighbors' faces instantly fall. The camera cuts to Mrs. Thompson's expression, her eyes widen slightly, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. She expected a white officer, someone who would be on their side. But now, as she sees Officer Thomas approach the family, her face turns pale with surprise. Mr. Parker, standing in his living room, slowly lowers the blinds, trying to hide his shock. His hand trembles as he does so, clearly uncomfortable with the reality that is unfolding before him. Mrs. Thompson mutters under her breath, I didn't expect that." The family, unaware of the neighbors' reactions, remains calm. Sarah and James exchange glances but don't show any sign of fear or anxiety. They both smile warmly as Officer Thomas approaches, relieved that the situation might be resolved quickly. "Good evening, officer," Sarah says politely, though her voice is still filled with uncertainty. "Can we help you with something?" Officer Thomas nods respectfully, his voice calm. I'm just here to clear up a misunderstanding. We got a call about some concerns in the neighborhood and I wanted to speak with you for a moment." His demeanor is professional but empathetic. The family thanks him for his calm approach. "We appreciate you coming by," James responds, his voice steady. "We're just trying to settle into our new home." The neighbors continue to watch from their windows, unable to hide their discomfort. Mrs. Thompson shifts uncomfortably in her seat, clearly shaken. "I thought he would be like us," she murmurs. Mr. Parker, who has been hiding behind his curtains, turns away from the window entirely, avoiding the scene. His face is flushed with embarrassment as the reality of the situation settles in. The family remains unaware of the tension building among the neighbors. They continue speaking with Officer Thomas, who is polite and considerate, ensuring that everything is okay. The neighbors, however, are left with a sense of unease. They had expected the situation to escalate with a white officer in charge, but now that it's a black officer, they're unsure how to react. As Officer Thomas continues to speak with the neighbors, the camera suddenly shifts focus to a neighbor standing at the edge of their yard. This neighbor, a middle-aged man named Greg, has been quietly watching the entire interaction from his window. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he pulls out his phone, discreetly recording the entire situation. The camera zooms in on Greg's phone as he records the confrontation. He captures Officer Thomas calmly speaking to Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Parker, his words cutting through the awkward silence. The neighbors' discomfort is palpable as they try, and fail, to justify their actions. The officer's composed and respectful demeanor contrasts sharply with their nervous fidgeting and stammering excuses. Greg's video shows everything: the awkwardness of the neighbors, the officer's professional handling of the situation, and the black family standing quietly, still processing the unfairness of what has happened. The video captures a powerful moment of racial tension, but also of calm resolution. The next scene shifts to a phone screen displaying the video. The video has been uploaded to social media, and the views are skyrocketing. It starts with just a few shares, but soon it's everywhere. On Twitter, it gets thousands of retweets. On Instagram, it's spreading like wildfire. Facebook users are sharing it with their friends, commenting on how the situation unfolded and how the officer handled it with grace. The caption reads, "Racism exposed in the neighborhood. Officer defends black family after racist call to police." As the video continues to spread, people from all over the world start reacting to it. Some are horrified by the neighbor's blatant racism, while others are moved by the officer's ability to remain professional and stand up for what's right. The screen splits into multiple frames, showing various reactions from online users. On Twitter, a user named @JusticeForAll tweets, "This is why we need more officers like Officer Thomas. He did what was right and exposed the ugly truth of racism. Racism in America, justice for all." Another tweet from @Truchange reads, "I can't believe these neighbors thought they could get away with this. Shame on them. We need to do better." On Instagram, a video by a popular influencer, @RealTalk, goes viral as they react to the footage. "This is what racism looks like. It's subtle, but it's still there. Kudos to Officer Thomas for calling it out and standing up for this family." In the comment sections, people are calling for accountability. One user writes, "These neighbors need to be held accountable for what they did. I hope the community stands with this family." Others are praising the black family for staying calm and composed in such a tense situation. Meanwhile, the news outlets pick up the story. The screen shows various headlines: "Racist neighbors called police on innocent family. The officer's identity shocks everyone. Viral video exposes racism in suburban neighborhood. Officer defends black family in heated confrontation with racist neighbors." The media coverage brings more attention to the issue of racial profiling, with pundits and activists weighing in on the need for societal change. A few local reporters interview Officer Thomas, who calmly speaks about his duty to treat everyone equally and fairly. The neighbors, now fully aware of the backlash, are shown retreating into their homes, clearly embarrassed. Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Parker are hardly seen outside for days, and when they are, they avoid eye contact with anyone. The scene opens with the black family sitting together in their cozy living room, the tension of the past few days slowly fading. It's a calm evening, and the family is enjoying their time together. They smile at each other, reflecting on how far they've come despite the challenges. The camera captures small moments of warmth: Sarah helping Aiden with his homework, James flipping through a magazine as Jasmine curls up beside him. Despite the recent events, they are a family united, strong in their love and determination. Sarah looks around at her family, her voice filled with quiet pride. "We've been through a lot these past few days, but we're still here. And we're stronger for it." James nods in agreement, his face soft but resolute. "This is our home now. We'll make it work, and we'll keep pushing for change, one step at a time." As the camera pans outside, the evening light glows warmly over their home. The neighborhood, once filled with tension and whispers, seems more peaceful now. The black family has been through a trial, but they've come out the other side with their heads held high. Across the street, Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Parker sit quietly in their living rooms, each lost in thought. Mrs. Thompson watches the black family through her window, her face etched with regret. She knows the situation could have been handled differently. Mr. Parker, meanwhile, is staring down at his hands, realizing that his own prejudices have caused harm. After a few days of reflecting on the backlash from the viral video and the conversations that followed, Mrs. Thompson finally gathers the courage to walk up to the Black family's front door. She hesitates for a moment before knocking gently. When Sarah opens the door, Mrs. Thompson offers a hesitant but sincere apology. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was wrong about you, and I shouldn't have judged you based on nothing but fear." Sarah looks at her with quiet understanding, her voice gentle but firm. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot, but you have to understand that it takes more than an apology. It takes action and real change." Mr. Parker also approaches later that day, standing awkwardly at the door, offering a brief apology of his own. I made assumptions. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'm sorry for what I did." The family listens respectfully but does not immediately forgive them. It's clear that while these apologies are a start, the road to reconciliation is still long. The damage has been done, and they know they will need to work harder to change their mindset and their behavior. The screen fades to a simple black background with white text judging people by their character, not their race, is the only way forward. We are all part of this world together, and it's time to stand up for what's right, not just when it's convenient, but all the time. The text fades, and the scene shifts back to the Black family, standing together in front of their home. They smile at the camera, their faces filled with hope and resolve for the future. The sun sets behind them, casting a golden glow that symbolizes the potential for a brighter, more inclusive tomorrow. The video ends with the family's hopeful faces, their strength and unity a testament to their journey and their future.